Good morning and happy Wednesday morning to you. The first Wednesday of October 2018. This is Pastor Lorenzo Neal, hailing from Cajun Land, USA, here to present you with seeds of wisdom, empowerment, liberation. We are promoting a knowledge that is engaging and transforming, and it's our hope that every time we do this show, that you, our listeners, are are living to change the world around you and impact the world around you. And as well as always, you're welcome to join us on this illuminating journey. Uh, we're doing a new thing. We're streaming live on YouTube. So it's a completely different avenue for me. I'm just trying something different, but we appreciate you for tuning in. If you are listening live, we appreciate you. If you are tuning in, you'll probably be able to see it on YouTube. So do that. So there's always the ways that you can join us on this illuminating journey. The primary way, if you like to get your thoughts online or live on air, you can call 347-237-5230. That is the number to call to get your thoughts on the air. Also, if you hit us up on blogtalkradio.com/Zera Today, the chat line is open so you can get in on that. Go to our Zera Network Facebook page and connect on that. I don't know what I'm doing, so y'all just ignore me. I'm new to this video streaming thing, so I don't know where to look in the camera or talk in the microphone or do both. I do not know. Anyway, uh, follow us on all social media. We're on Twitter. The show handle is at Zera Radio, and my personal handle is at Lorenzo T. Neal. So you can follow us there. And anywhere else we may be on. Podcast is available in all outlets, so we invite you to go back and look at all archive shows and let us know what you think. And visit our Patreon page. Follow us on Patreon, subscribe to the show, follow us on Patreon, and you can see how you can help this show go further and do more. So we appreciate all of that, all that you allow us to do. So today's topic is the church a trauma trigger? That's what we're going to be talking about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And again, this new medium has me thrown off. Anyway, so we're going to talk about that. But before we go any further, there is a story I'd like to share that I found very interesting. This comes from Black Christian News Network. If you want to know about it, but the story is a Spanish actor to face court for cursing God and the Virgin Mary on Facebook. This Spanish actor is facing court for cursing Mary and the Virgin Mary and the church, the Catholic Church, and God. All right. So this is how it goes. 48-year-old Guillermo Willie Toledo, a respected Spanish actor and activist who cursed God and the Virgin Mary in an expletive-riddled post on Facebook a year ago, is expected to appear in court on charges of offending religious sentiments and an ongoing battle over free speech in Spain. And I can't read the comments, but you can go to the article on Black Christian News Network and find it. This actor basically um, is defending. He states that he's defending. His remarks come as he's defending three women who paraded through one of the Spanish cities dressed as vaginas, and he considered it as a similar to a religious procession. But they're arguing that it's offensive to the Holy Mother, that it is offensive, and the Christian lawyers are the ones who are bringing these charges against him. Now, We live in the United States, and if you've been around, you know that there are a lot of states who have been passing religious freedom laws, and these religious freedom laws are basically laws that, in some way, promote discrimination of some kind. Um, Now, here in Mississippi, there was one that basically said businesses have the opportunity to decide who they want to do business with if that person or those individuals are part of the LGBTQIA AI or whatever. I don't know, but they can discriminate against them. Now that the language isn't explicit about saying that, but that's what is implied. Um, and here in America, we still wrestle with this idea of free speech. uh, but I'm glad that I'm honestly glad that we don't go to we can't go to court unless it's specific defamation or slander or something to that nature. But other than that, you can say whatever you want to and get away with it. And we see a lot in Hollywood the way they portray Christians, and I know in a lot of horror movies the way they portray uh, church folk and preachers is it's is laughable at best. Uh, and it's just it's things like that that makes me laugh. But I'm glad that we have an environment here in the United States where you can actually exercise your right to say whatever. And while that's contentious now, and there's the left, right, I'm center when it comes to that. I think people should be able to say what they want to say, how they want to say it, no matter how offensive it is, because the Constitution guarantees them that right to do so. However, I think persons should be considerate, and if you're going to do something that's offensive to me, I'll take it in stride, But the question comes when it's trolling, when people make these comments and trolling comments on online, stuff like that. Is that covered by free speech? And uh, there are several arguments counter to that. I don't know. However, it is what it is. Um, but it's just interesting. I find it interesting that um, they are literally bringing this man to court over this, and they're doing so with the intent solely because it is religiously motivated. And I hope that our country never gets to that point. My concern for those who are um, more right leaning and those who push for religious freedom laws is that they will get to the point where it's like what in certain college spaces, in certain college campuses, no voices are safe unless it's a similar voice, unless it's the voice of you know that's still in one's bubble. So if it's counter the for example, if you're on a left leaning campus and you're a right leaning person, then your voice is considered traumatic. Your speech is considered traumatic, and it's not safe. It's trigger speech for trauma and all that. Yeah, and that's crazy. Um, but you see it on both sides because you see the right um, advocating for speech that is only similar to what they want to hear, and you see the left catering for advocating for speech that is similar to only what they want to hear, and both is dangerous. And I hope we never get to that point in this country where talking about somebody else. Now, I'm gonna talk about this a little later on, but I honestly believe that we're not too far from what's happening in Mexico. I mean, in Spain. It's just funny that they're bringing. I hear people denounce God all the time, and it doesn't bother me. That's them. That's what they do, and they'll do what they do, and it is what it is. I don't know. I really just find that um, that Facebook. In this case, this guy was on Facebook. Uh, the little dude is here, and he smells food. Yeah, no food for you, little dude. But anyway, so I just thought I'd lead off with that. I got distracted. Um, but if you want to talk about that, send me an email, send leave a comment or something like that. I don't how you want to do that. So let's move into the topic of the day. Uh, topic of the day is the church. Is the church? Is the church a trauma trigger? And there are several stories that I'm gonna talk about that I think play into this. Um, and largely because I'm really talking about this largely because um, last week's hearing, Supreme Court hearing with Brett Kavanaugh and um, Dr. Blasey Ford. I was reading up. I did not watch the hearing intentionally. It's just too much drama. We got enough drama going on outside of the political arena. Um, and it's ratings for the media outlets. That's it's ratings, and ratings drive advertisement, drive dollars. So of course they're going to cover it. And I hate that we're overwhelmed in this particular presidential administration. We're overwhelmed with stuff that's driving ratings. It's a lot to talk about. President Trump is giving people a lot to talk about, good and bad, and seems to be the great political divide. I don't believe that's the case. However, um, it may be the case as far as popular media is. You're either going to be on this side or that side, and that's the way the thread is going. It seems to be going. I don't personally. I don't believe that's the case. I am around people who more center, and there are of course those who are just going to take sides no matter what because of where they're being fed. The information they're being fed will cause them to decide to take a side. However, there are still plenty of rational, free thinking people who are just like, you know what, y'all can have the drama. I just want the facts. Let's be reasoned. Let's come, let us reason together, says the Lord. I believe there's plenty of people who are still that way. However, um, there are people who hearing Dr. Ford's testimony. I was reading articles where there were a lot of women who, after hearing her moving testimony, themselves relived trauma that they had experienced regarding sexual assault. Now, sexual assault in any case is always going to be a he said, she said thing unless there's absolute proof that an assault took place. But you're talking, and unfortunately, in this day and time, microaggressions can also now be considered as sexual assault, and microaggressions can, yeah, it's so broad, and so there were persons who were saying that they were experiencing reliving trauma, and there were a lot more women who came out. Of course, there was the hashtag. Why I didn't tell or why I didn't report, something like that. And I know a lot of personal acquaintances of mine who had experienced um, some type of inappropriate sexual uh, behavior from a male and from a female. And I am part of that. I've experienced inappropriate behavior from females, unwanted touching in church. And I know most men would that, I, it, to them, That falls under the category of sexual assault. I didn't want you touching me. I didn't want you rubbing my back. Any of that. And yet and still that falls under sexual assault. So yeah, in that context, I've been sexually assaulted. I mean, if we're gonna be honest about it, in that context, I've been sexually assaulted. So all these women and men who were saying that Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony opened up these past traumatic experiences made me want to ask the question about the church, and the question of, is the church really triggering traumatic experiencing and causing people to come back to church because uh, trauma triggers? Let me put it within this perspective. People come to church. People come to church, and the church has been called a hospital. It's been a place. It's a place of healing. So people come to church if they've been through some stuff, and they come to church to experience moments, a couple of hours of fellowship and a couple of hours of uplifting and inspirational singing and inspirational preaching. You know, uh, hopefully it's all gospel centered, but I know that's neither here nor there. And so when people come to church with that in mind, what usually happens, or what does not happen, is it's not really addressing real issues. There are plenty of people who will come to church on Sunday, and when an altar call or invitation is extended to them for prayer, rededication, recommitment, and they come forward. In some places, the preacher will lay their hands on them, and folk will fall out. And in other places, they'll simply just pray and then go back to their seats. Or in some places, there's nothing. In some places, I'm talking about when it comes down to the preaching. When preachers preach about sin, and I think about one sermon I read by Jonathan Edwardson. It's a standard reading sermon to read in seminary and beginning preaching. That was the sermon, "Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God." And I've read that and had me scared from reading. But it was a different time during one of the great awakenings in America, and the emphasis was not on grace. The emphasis was on sin and judgment. And for centuries, that never really changed. For centuries, that was the centrality of the preaching in a lot of churches: sin and judgment. You preach sin because you wanted people to come to church and repent. And you preach judgment because you wanted them to have this sense of fear. You wanted them to have a sense of fear of God because God was angry that you sinned. And for centuries, that was basically the methodology preachers used, condemning what you wear, how you dress, condemning who you interacted with, condemning social behaviors that were out of the norm for church. And these messages were regurgitated by preachers across the country, across the world, based on whatever faith tradition you were in. And at the beginning of the 20th century, you start to see less of that in mainline denominations. That was the inclusion of the social gospel, And the social gospel was a more compassion kind of thing, kind of thing. So people would come to church because of what the church was doing for them. And then the message of of sin and judgment fell out of the norm and was basically relegated to those non-educated churches, the rural churches or the Pentecostal apostolic churches, those sanctified churches, the sanctified. And for the most part, that message of sin and judgment stayed, and in some places still remains in those church settings. So people go to these church settings week after week and only hear messages that are angry, full of anger from God because of people. God is angry at people for being homosexual. God is angry at the country for allowing homosexual marriage. God is angry at people for whatever reason. And God is always angry. And God is always ready to strike us down or ready to send the tribulation. And that's that's a whole different thing. But that is what a lot of people hear. And think about those persons who have experienced trauma similar to what Dr. Blasey Ford experienced. Now, I am not negating whether her experience was true or not. I believe that she had some type of serious trauma. I believe whatever it was really, really, really impacted her life in the way that she said it has impacted her life, even though she has ascertained the highest education and been, she's a person of privilege. Whether they can admit it, she's a person of privilege. I do believe that trauma happened and has, and by her own words, has deeply affected her in her life. Now, when you think about people who go to church and they go to church week after week and only to hear a sermon bashing, not them directly, but perhaps bashing their past. I'm learning to be careful with that. You once were, kind of thing. Now, I I'm I I used to do that. Because I was very legalistic in my approach to ministry and preaching and personal life, and it wasn't the best. But I considered myself very holy and very sanctified, and if you weren't up to my standards, I was afraid that if you died the next day or that day, you going to hell. And I was putting people in hell before I was putting them in heaven. Not by preaching, but just by my interaction with them. If I believe they weren't up to my standards, you backslidden, you a reprobate, you on your way to hell. And I'm sorry, I did what I did, you know. But think about the people who sit in churches like that, who experience traumatic events, life events, only to have their sense of godliness, their sense of holiness, their sense of sanctification, and their sense of healing and safety, security, revoked weekly, if not weekly, monthly, if not monthly. Some point in their life, they hear a message. They probably get tired of hearing it, but they're afraid to leave church because they've been conditioned that if they leave the church, the likelihood of them going to hell increases. Even if they believe they are saved, they can lose their salvation. According to some who interpreted Hebrews, a couple of scriptures in Hebrews, they can lose their salvation by leaving the fellowship of the church. Now we know that's not true, and I know a lot of people who left church and have become non-believers. They seem to be all right. Now I can't, they make it a good judgment day. They do. They do. They don't. I don't know. Well, that's neither here nor there. Think about those who aren't allowed to speak about their traumatic experience because the church would put them to shame just for doing it. There are a couple of stories that broke out not long ago about not a story, about a young lady who um, been doing a time of altar call, whatever, altar prayer. She went to the front and she said that the pastor or her father, I can't recall, so um, had been molesting her, and her mother knew, and all of this. And I'm gonna learn how to do all of this videos and pull them up, and you can see. Um, but anyway, yeah, while she was doing that, the mother was on the front row and she was just denying, calling the girl a liar, and the pastor was trying to take the microphone for her, all to deny her privilege, her right to be able to share the hurt and who caused the hurt, and put to end the shame that she may have been experiencing, the trauma that she was experiencing, only for those church members to be negative toward her instead of embracing, instead of trying to reassure her that she was loved and that the person who committed the act against her was wrong, and that the church was not going to reinforce the negative experiences, but was going to go and show her, embrace her, the love of Christ, let it be shed abroad from their hearts to her. But instead, it did not happen. And imagine she kept going to that church Sunday after Sunday, looking at probably the person who oppressed her, the person who caused the trauma in her life. If that was the preacher, if that was the mother's husband, or whoever it was, trusted person, only to hear messages against her, the victim, and not messages in love for her. And it's a delicate, I understand it is a very delicate, delicate thing to do, but it must be done. Uh, when I preach now, my younger days, I want to be the big preacher. I wanted to talk about stuff because I want to be able to say that I was tough. Not tough. That's probably not the best word, but I was a preacher. I was the man of God, and I was the preacher and prophet of God. And if you weren't right, the Lord had blessed me with spiritual gifts, so I was able to function in, prophetic unctions and word of knowledge, word of wisdom. I was able to function in those gifts, and I would see stuff about people. Um, and at the time, I believe it was my job to tell it if I saw it. And I didn't realize that I was contributing to a lot of trauma that people didn't want to share, people didn't want to expose, people didn't want people to know. And I didn't care because I was walking in my gift. And to this day, I have to reflect on that ministry I was trying to walk in, believing that that was it for me. And I was like, did I, in trying to expose my gift, operate in my gift, do more harm and hurt than help? And I believe that to be the case. I think by me calling folk out in their sin did more harm than help. And I still do this, especially now since I'm trained as a therapist and a counselor, and I understand trauma, especially since I'm a victim of trauma, more times than I care, uh, I have a greater sympathy as well as empathy for those who experience trauma, and they come to church and they hear something in the sermon that triggers that that trauma, triggers the reflection, and sometimes they're unequipped to know how to deal with it. So they'll cry, or they believe they're worshiping. They'll hear a song about pain and struggle and coming out, and they may not have fully come out or have fully recovered from their trauma. And they hear that song and it's pulling on their heartstrings, and yet they don't know how to react. And so they react the church way. And the church way is to lift your hands and praise God, and by faith thank God for your deliverance. By faith thank God for all of this. That's the church reaction. And the trauma is still there. It doesn't go away because they're not equipped through the church on how to deal with it. And the preacher is not equipped. I mean, we want a high praise moment, and folk will say, well, if I praise hard enough, I won't experience the pain, the emotions that accompany this uncovering again. And it's a sad thing. It is a very sad thing that people have to experience that. And while, I'm gonna give you an example. I think one of the biggest triggers for me is when I hear people preachers talking about their wealth. And I'm like, dude, I'm like, really? You gonna brag about what you got, and here I am struggling? That's a trigger, because it causes an anxiety for those who may not, what about I'm tithing every week and I'm still waiting on my breakthrough. And you talking about how you got because you tithe, and I'm like, I'm faithful with my tithe. Am I giving in the right? Am I sowing in the right ground? Is it good ground? What the problem is? Why am I not seeing or experiencing what you're experiencing? If you're such a wonderful tither and giver and all of this, and if I have the same heart and same method, if the method is the same, if it's only the requirement for getting a blessing from God is giving and tithing, then why isn't it happening? That's a trigger. It may trigger anxiety, may trigger extra stress. It may trigger a person's to question their whole entire being. I think as a pastor, I want to be more proactive in my preaching. And I still want to preach on sin. I still want people to be aware that they were born in sin, shaping in iniquity. I want them to be aware that because of who they are as human beings, if you believe in the doctrine of original sin, because Adam sinned, as Paul writes, because of the one Adam sinned, there had to be the second Adam to redeem us from sin, to reconcile us to God, to justify us, right? So I'm obligated to preach that. That is the core of the gospel message. Jesus Christ came, died, rose again. All right, that's the core of the gospel message. It needs to be present in every sermon. And back in my Baptist days, you had to put them on the cross, take them off the cross, and get them in the sky. And every now and then I still do that. And when I hear my sermon, one Friday they put him on Golgotha's hill, on a hill called Calvary. He stayed there all day Friday, all night Friday night, all day Saturday, all night Saturday night. But early Sunday morning he got up. Yeah, that's the core of the gospel preaching. Yeah, it should be integrated into every message in some capacity. But I am being more proactive with integrating the message of the need to preach against sin, sinful behavior, and all of that with the compassion of God's grace. And it's a delicate balance, because you want people to know that they are walking in grace, and that they who were former things can be new creatures in Christ by faith in the work that he did for us on the cross. And that is critical. Faith is critical. Grace is critical. But at the same time, if all I'm emphasizing is sin, sinful behavior, and addressing that in a way that may trigger a person to say, well, I'm never good enough because this happened to me, And even though I know I'm saved, even though I know I'm sanctified, and even though I know all of this, I can't seem to recover. I can't seem to get right. My life seems to keep going on this path when I wanted to go on a different path. And there's nothing I can do about it. That's the kind of thing I believe that we have to address. There's let me, there's a article that another one I found on Black Christian Network. I'll share. But let me on Ann Brock's blog page, the Old Black Church. She posted an article a couple of days ago about a popular preacher. Let me see if I can bring it up. Uh, what's this guy's name? Um, Bishop Tudor Bismarck. I'm not familiar with him. Um, Bishop Tudor Bismarck. Anyway, apparently he's a pastor, and I don't know what the name of his church is or anything like that. But apparently he's a popular pastor. But according to the article, it's saying that he well, there's a video. There's a video where he seems to be chastising his church family. Um, and I can't play the video because I ain't learned how to integrate all this stuff yet. But in the video, it basically him telling members that if they're doing stuff in the name of the church, he should be aware of it. They shouldn't be just soliciting on behalf of the church, and he's not aware of it. He's not involved in it because it could be a scam. So he just wants to protect the name of the church. Then couple other things he talking about, if you're gonna work in the church, you need to do this, do that, blah blah blah, yada yada yada, stuff I say from the pulpit too. I've said stuff. I don't see it as maybe I but the title of the article was, should pastors chastise church members in front of the world, all behind closed doors? And first I thought this would work into the topic, but apparently it's not. It's gonna work as like I wanted to. But the when it comes to and triggering trauma, and I'm trying to stay on topic here when it comes to talking about triggering trauma. Um, pastors, we as shepherds and as administrators, we have an obligation to keep the house in order. We have an obligation to keep the house in order and to make sure things function as they should. And I have no problem calling out folk. I don't do it from the pulpit. I preached a sermon about uh, somebody I'm having alt with. If the script says if you have alt with your brother, go to that person. But I don't use my pulpit as a bully pulpit. But I know a lot of folk who do. I've been in churches where they have, and they're just going to air out all the dirty. I was at a visiting church. I was visiting a church, right? I was visiting a church, and apparently, uh, the church has a lot of drama going on, and the pastor literally his sermon, I could tell that his sermon was directed at the folk who was causing the trouble. And I mean, he all but said the names. I mean, he's giving details about what happened, when, and and I'm like, dude, I don't think this is appropriate. That's what board meeting is for. That's what leadership is for. Block for you. And if you address it, if you feel like you have to address it before the church, then you should do it in a way that like it ain't part of your sermon, but just as far as I know, every church has a time for pastoral remarks, and you can use it in that time and say, look, there's something I want to address, and I want to do it in a manner that is both loving and stern. And I want you to know this situation has come up to my attention, these persons, and you ain't got to be, you ain't got to name names, but you got to be like, okay, this is the situation, this is what's going on, and this is how I believe we should approach the matter. That's how I've done it. It's worked for me. I I never forget. I had a member of the church that was very antagonistic. Her whole role at the church was to antagonize every pastor. That's what she did. Every pastor that was appointed to that church, her role was to antagonize. And when I got appointed to the church, sure enough, they were just waiting. When she gonna do it? When she gonna do it? And sure enough, she did. And I never forget, we were at a board meeting, and she just raised up some issue that was not important at all and pressed it and pressed it. And when I say the member of the board got dead silent and looked at me, and it was like, okay, here it is, showtime. Let's get it going. Where the popcorn at? Oh yeah, she finna go. She finna tear him up, rip him to parts. And I listened to her rant, and I was like, okay, sister, thank you very much. And moving on. Didn't even entertain it. And they were like, wait a minute, you ain't gonna entertain it? You ain't got no rebuttal? I was like, for what? She said what she said. This was the discussion. I ain't got a part in the discussion. We got to move on a vote. And thank you for your discussion. And all in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Pow. That was the end of that. I gave no room for it, which kind of threw her for a loop because she's used to the pastor, challenging her. And I'm like, I ain't challenging you. Not a big deal to me. All right, you'll get your way, and I'm gonna get mine because I'm the pastor. But I believe when we do stuff like that as pastors, when we take personal issues to task behind the pulpit in a sermon, I believe we again trigger trauma. Because think about the rant that what's the name? That singer, gospel singer, not long ago, just a few weeks ago, went on a rant a few months ago. And I think it was in June, July. Went on this rant about the church and called it, BS and all that kind of. I mean, it was it was something. But the whole time she was dealing with hurt that she believed she had experienced, and she was a pastor. Leandria Johnson, that's her name. Thank you, Leandria Johnson. She experienced all this trauma, both as a preacher's kid, and then as a pastor and as a gospel artist. And the only way she felt she could address it was by going live on Facebook and just going off. Something triggered that. And I believe there are a lot of people in the church that sit there week after week and it's being built up because that trauma is being reinforced through messages that are not empowering and liberating. That people come in and they keep saying they want to be delivered from something. If they go to that type of church where they preach this kind of deliverance. And I remember growing up and I went to a church where they tarried until you got delivered. And I never get that. We would be in church sometime hours. If it started at 6 o'clock, you won't be finished till 10 or 11, or sometimes as late as midnight, because they were going to tarry until you got deliverance. You didn't get delivered, they going to pray until they saw evidence. However it was, whether you spoke in tongues, whether you foamed at the mouth, rolled on the floor, that was their evidence determining that you had been delivered. Thank God we don't do that. Thank God we're delivered from that. But most times people will go back and they will have that experience, but they weren't really delivered. They had an experience. And sometimes people will want to come back to re-experience the experience because they feel that the experience was good enough. And then the preacher harps back on the sin thing, how wrong they are. I was at a church one time, and not a, I was in a church one time when it actually happened. This preacher was, uh, he knew people. I think it was a family church, but he knew folk. He knew what their business was, and every Sunday he put it on blast. You still ain't. He's like, you still ain't saved. You still ain't delivered. I saw you doing this, and this would be from the pulpit. He do this, and he tried to call me out one time, and I was like, man, you don't know me like that. I know I come. I was in college, and we go. It's one of the churches. They have Sunday night service, and I'd go. And I'm like, you don't know me like that, dude. Just because I'm in college, you just assuming I'm doing college stuff. And he didn't know I was a minister either. So, so when I talk about triggers, um, I'm bringing up this last story here, and this comes from again, uh, Sister Ann Brock's Old Black Show, Old Black Church blog. There's a popular pastor called named Matthew Stevenson. I'm not gonna call him doctor because he don't have a doctor. At least I have no evidence of that. Uh, and I'm sorry if I offended him. If you want to be called doctor, that's fine. I I just if you earned it, you're gonna be earning the title doc. You calling you doctor. But if you just doctor just because, okay, this is just personal point of preference. Okay, so point of privilege. But anyway, Dr. Matthew Stevenson has been under fire. I guess that's a, a, a good way of putting it. There's a video of him preaching, and what he said came across as being offensive to some persons. He talked about um, you know women looking at him in his tight pants or whatever, or was it men? I don't know. I couldn't understand if the clip wasn't clear as who he was addressing. With the people looking at him, he said she looking at him or he looking at him, and then in the latter part of the video, he's calling a woman fat. It's like, if you got rolls, he ain't gonna want you. You need to do something about that. And of course, that did something to a lot of folk. And there are persons on the road on the web who are saying that he is closeted homosexual. I don't know, really don't care if he is or he isn't. But there was he has a video saying that his wife ministers either at porn conventions or strip clubs or something like that, and he says that's her ministry. He's a seer. He can't do that because he doesn't want those thoughts in his eyes or something like that. That's neither here nor there. But he has come under fire for the comments because you know they've been saying that he's coming across as a bully. He called one person who um, he made a Facebook post about renovations in his church that were completed, and somebody commented, and the response that he gave to the commenter was by calling him ugly, and then went on from there, and that went viral. And while he has plenty of persons supporting him, as many persons probably as not supporting him, the issue again comes back to, is the church reinforcing and triggering trauma? The church is supposed to be a place of healing, and his followers, even those members of his church, I shouldn't have used that word followers, but those members, particularly those women who heard him say that, they're already traumatized by the fact that they don't have the image that society wants them to have. In my opinion, I'm not gonna say the bigger the better, but it, you know, my type is my type. but but to hear that, and many were shouting in it, and also I would think about A comment by Jamal Bryant when he made a comment while he was preaching, and he said uh, a line from a popular song, and I'm not going to say what the line was, but when he included that in his sermon, uh, the audience and the congregation, comprised mostly of women, reacted in a positive way by shouting and yeah. But then they may have gone home, and this again is speculation, but they may have gone home probably feeling, man, I fit that description. I am this person. Should I go back to this church when he just insulted me? Should I, am I not doing enough, even though I'm working out and my body is an image, is it may not be as important as it was, but now it is, because it's come to the consciousness. It comes to my consciousness because it's my pastor says that I am not what I should be. I could be better. I may be just big boned, but big bone isn't attractive, according to my pastor. So now I go back to this church Sunday, and my pastor's wife is nice, lean, trim, and all this. And here I am. I don't fit what he like. And even though I don't want my pastor to be attracted to me, I want my pastor to be attracted to me. I want to be able to say I'm attractive. And I'm a member of an attractive pastors and pastor wife, first lady church. Think about that. Is that triggering something? Is that creating a greater sense of anxiety? I think we got to do better. I think we can do better. I think we will be doing better when we take the emphasis off of ourselves as pastors, as preachers, as clergy altogether. And as Christians, if we are to be relational, we are to be relational. If we're going to be authentic, we need to do so. And definitely not need to be encouraging and loving. We have to be. And the thing about all of this, the 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 end of the matter is, how will we show God's love? How will we show the love of Christ when we have people in our congregations who are silently dealing with issues, who are silently struggling with trauma that happened maybe in their youth, maybe not so long ago, maybe very recently, and they come to church and something triggers that. And they may react in a positive way at first. They may react by crying, by lifting their hands, doing all this stuff, but then they go back home and they're like, okay, now what? The expectation is something of change. And I've learned that we can't put that out there. We must give them this sense of hope. And as Paul writes, we must let them know that that hope is still there. It's present. And we must be an environment, a place where believers in Christ can gather in their humanity, in their frailty, and find a sense of community, a community that is non-judgmental. I'm not talking about the judge, not let you be judged. I'm talking about a community that recognizes that all of us are sinners, as we love to say, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And there is no hierarchical sin. No sin is greater than the other. And we shouldn't focus only on behavioral sins and things of that nature that we can see and we can call out. But we should be a community of believers who know we've all been traumatized by something. Sin in and of itself, being a sinful creature, is traumatizing enough. And every week, I think we should reinforce how we go about doing that. So I think we can do it. I have committed myself to doing it, and I believe we can do that. Look, I want to invite you to like the page on YouTube. Since I'm trying this live, I don't know how, but yeah, like the page on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the page. That's how it is, and you can support me by going to Patreon. and I'll put the information there in the description. You can also follow me on all the social media that I'm on as Pastor Lorenzo Neal, and invite you to especially um, listen in as I try to do this new medium. I don't know. I'll get better at it. Uh, I'll take some Skillshare classes to get better. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. We'll try to do this as often as we can on Wednesdays. We may change the time. Right now it's 11 on Wednesdays. But anyway, go to blogtalkradio.com/Zera Today. Catch up on all archive shows. We've been doing it for the last 8 years. And what else? 9 years? 8 years? Yeah, well, however long we've been doing it. We've been doing it. But keep us in your thoughts and your prayers. We do this good. We'll try to keep going. And we thank you for your support. And I'm going to get out of here as I do on Facebook. I'm not Facebook, on Blog Talk. So, all right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great one. God bless you. God keep you.